The cop planted drugs on me. Too bad for him. My dash cam was rolling. Step out of the vehicle. Now. Officer Derek Howland's voice cut through the humid August air like a blade. His hand rested on his service weapon, fingers tapping a rhythm that made my stomach twist. I'd seen that look before, in the mirror, actually, back when I was fresh out of the police academy. That look said someone had already decided how this story was going to end. I complied, hands visible, movements slow and deliberate. My Toyota Camry sat on the shoulder of Route 47, hazard lights blinking in the darkness. I'd been pulled over for a broken taillight that had worked perfectly fine 30 seconds earlier. "You know why I stopped you?" Howland asked, circling my car like a shark. "The taillight you claim is broken?" I kept my voice level, professional. He didn't like that. His jaw clenched. "Smart mouth gets you nowhere, Mr. Garrett." What happened next should have destroyed my life. Officer Howland's body camera mysteriously malfunctioned. He searched my vehicle and pulled a plastic bag from under my passenger seat. A bag I'd never seen before, filled with white powder. Well, he said, holding it up with theatrical disgust. "Looks like we've got ourselves a drug dealer." I should have panicked. I should have shouted my innocence. Instead, I looked directly at my rearview mirror, at the tiny LED light still blinking red on my dash cam, and I smiled. "Officer Howland," I said calmly, "I think you should know something." 6 months later, Derek Howland wasn't just fired. He was inmate number 847652 at Oakdale Correctional Facility, serving 8 years for evidence tampering, false arrest, and conspiracy. His entire career, 14 years of arrests, convictions, and commendations, was being systematically reviewed. Dozens of cases were overturned. His pension was gone. His reputation was ash. And I became the man who brought down an entire network of corrupt cops, turned my wrongful arrest into a civil rights crusade, and walked away with a 7-figure settlement that I used to change everything. Justice must be restored and arrogance punished. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Caleb Garrett, and 6 months before that traffic stop, I was living what most people would call a decent life. I worked as a network security analyst for Hartwell Insurance, pulling in $62,000 a year. Not wealthy, but comfortable. I had a small apartment in Millbrook, a mid-sized town where everyone knew everyone's business, and I'd recently started dating Vanessa, a kindergarten teacher with a smile that could light up a room. But there was something most people didn't know about me, something I'd kept buried for 7 years. I used to be a cop, not just any cop. I'd graduated top of my class at the State Police Academy, earned commendations for crisis intervention, and was being fast-tracked for detective. My training officer, Sergeant Malcolm Torres, called me the most promising recruit he'd seen in 20 years. Then I saw what the job really was. It started small. A fellow officer, Derek Howland, planting evidence on a teenager during a drug bust. I reported it through proper channels. Internal Affairs investigated and found insufficient evidence. 2 weeks later, I was assigned to desk duty for performance concerns that had never existed before. My fellow officers stopped talking to me. My locker was vandalized. Someone slashed my tires in the station parking lot. The message was clear. Loyalty to the Brotherhood mattered more than the truth. I had a choice: stay and become complicit, or leave and lose the career I'd sacrificed everything for. I chose my conscience over my badge. I resigned quietly, moved to Millbrook, and tried to build a normal life. I told everyone, including Vanessa, that I'd left law enforcement due to burnout. It was easier than explaining that I'd been pushed out for refusing to be corrupt. 7 years passed. I convinced myself I'd moved on. I was good at my job, analyzing network vulnerabilities and keeping insurance data secure. The skills I'd learned in police forensics training translated surprisingly well to cybersecurity. I had a routine, a girlfriend, a future that looked stable if not exciting. Then I made a mistake that would change everything. I was driving home from Vanessa's place around 11 on a Friday night. Route 47 was deserted, just empty farmland and the occasional gas station. I wasn't speeding. My registration was current. I hadn't had a drop to drink. But when I saw the patrol car pull out behind me with its lights flashing, my gut clenched with old instincts. I pulled over immediately, hands on the wheel, interior light on. All the things that were supposed to keep encounters like this safe and professional. Officer Derek Howland approached my window, and I recognized him instantly. 7 years older, 50 pounds heavier, but the same cold eyes. He'd been a bully when we worked together, the kind of cop who enjoyed the power more than the duty. He'd been written up multiple times for excessive force, but always seemed to skate by. He didn't recognize me at first. Why would he? I'd been a nobody, a trainee he'd barely noticed before I became a problem. License and registration, he said, shining his flashlight directly in my eyes. I complied, handing over my documents. He studied them for a long moment, his expression shifting as he read my name. Caleb Garrett, he said slowly. That name sounds familiar. My heart rate spiked. It's a common name. No, I know you. His smile was predatory. You're the academy washout who couldn't hack it. The one who filed that bogus complaint against me. I resigned, I said evenly. And the complaint was legitimate. Wrong thing to say? His expression hardened into something dangerous. Wait here, he ordered. He returned to his patrol car, and I watched in my rearview mirror as he made a call. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. When he returned, his body camera was conspicuously turned off, a violation of department policy. I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. That's when I remembered the dash cam. I'd installed it 3 months earlier after a minor fender bender where the other driver tried to blame me. It was a high-end model with night vision, audio recording, and a battery backup in case someone cut the power. It saved footage automatically to a cloud server every 60 seconds. The little red LED was still blinking, recording everything. Is there a problem, officer? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Out. Now. I complied. Howland searched my vehicle with theatrical thoroughness, making a show of looking under seats and in the glove compartment. Then he straightened up, holding a clear plastic bag filled with what looked like cocaine. Well, he said, his voice loud enough to carry. Looks like we've got ourselves a drug dealer. The bag had not been in my car. I'd never seen it before. Howland had just planted evidence on me, and we both knew it. That's not mine, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. You just put that there. Really? That's your defense. He pulled out his handcuffs. Turn around. As he cuffed me, his breath hot on my neck, he whispered, should have stayed quiet 7 years ago, Garrett. This is what happens to rats. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a random stop. This was revenge. Howland had recognized my name on my license and decided to destroy me the way he thought I'd tried to destroy him. He shoved me into the back of his patrol car and drove me to the county jail, where I was processed, photographed, and thrown into a holding cell with 4 other men. The charges were possession with intent to distribute, a felony that carried up to 15 years. My perfect life had just evaporated in 20 minutes. But here's what Howland didn't know. I wasn't the same scared trainee who'd left the force 7 years ago. I'd learned patience. I'd learned strategy. And I had every second of his setup recorded in crystal clear video. I didn't panic. I didn't protest. I made my one phone call to a lawyer, and then I sat in that cell and planned exactly how I was going to destroy Derek Howland and everyone who'd protected him. I was released on $20,000 bail after 16 hours in county lockup. My lawyer, Patricia Cho, was a former prosecutor who'd switched sides after seeing too many wrongful convictions. She listened to my story with the skeptical professionalism of someone who'd heard every excuse imaginable. They found drugs in your car, she said flatly. That's going to be hard to fight. I have video, I replied. Her eyebrow raised. Body camera footage? His was off. Mine wasn't. I showed her the dash cam footage on my phone, streaming from the cloud backup. We watched in silence as Howland circled my car, reached into his jacket pocket, and, in one smooth motion clearly visible in the night vision enhanced video, slipped the plastic bag under my passenger seat before discovering it seconds later. Patricia's expression transformed from skeptical to predatory. How clear is the original file? 1080p, 60 frames per second, with audio. Time-stamped and automatically uploaded to secure cloud storage. The metadata proves it hasn't been edited. She leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. Mr. Garrett, I think we need to have a longer conversation about your goals here. Because we can either get your charges dismissed, or we can burn down an entire corrupt system. Why not both? I asked. We spent the next 3 days strategizing. Patricia was careful, methodical. She'd seen police corruption cases fall apart because evidence was mishandled or because prosecutors protected their own. She wanted everything airtight before we made a move. We need to understand the full scope, she explained. If Howland planted evidence on you as revenge, there's a good chance he's done it before. This might be bigger than one bad cop. She was right. I spent those 3 days doing what I did best. Digging through digital records. I started with public court documents, searching for every arrest Howland had made in the past 7 years. The pattern emerged quickly. 83 arrests for drug possession, 77 convictions. Almost all of them were people with no prior criminal history, pulled over for minor traffic violations on Route 47, the same stretch of empty highway where he'd stopped me. But the discovery that changed everything came from an unlikely source. I was at the public library, using their high-speed internet to download court transcripts, when I noticed another man doing the same thing. He was in his mid-50s, weathered and tired-looking, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting a losing battle for too long. His name was Howard Finch, and 7 years ago, his son Nathan had been arrested by Derek Howland for drug possession. Nathan, an honor student with a full scholarship to State University, claimed he'd been framed. Nobody believed him. He was convicted and served 3 years. He lost his scholarship, his future, and eventually his will to live. He died by suicide 2 years after his release. Howard had spent those 7 years trying to prove his son's innocence. He'd filed complaints, hired lawyers, and investigated on his own, but without evidence, he'd gotten nowhere. When I showed him my dash cam footage, he started crying. They said Nathan was lying, Howard whispered. They said he was just another drug dealer. But I knew my son. I knew. Howard's research was incredible. He'd documented every case, interviewed dozens of Howland's victims, and mapped out a pattern. But he'd lacked the one thing that could prove it: hard evidence. I had that evidence. And now I understood that this wasn't just about my arrest. This was about dozens of destroyed lives, ruined futures, and families torn apart by systematic corruption. Patricia brought in a private investigator named Keith Dunn, a former FBI agent who specialized in police misconduct cases. Keith reviewed everything Howard had compiled and my dashcam footage. "This is going to explode," Keith said grimly. "But you need to understand what you're walking into. The police department will circle the wagons. The prosecutor's office will fight to protect their conviction rate. You'll be painted as a cop hater with an agenda. Your life will become a nightmare. More of a nightmare than a felony conviction and 15 years in prison." I asked. "Fair point," he conceded. "Okay, let's burn it down properly." What we discovered over the next 2 weeks was even worse than we'd imagined. Howland wasn't working alone. There was a network. For officers, including Howland, were running a quota system. The department had instituted performance metrics that tied promotions and bonuses to arrest numbers. Drug arrests were worth more than traffic citations. Planting evidence was their shortcut to career advancement. Keith found the evidence by following the money. The seized drugs from all these arrests were supposed to be destroyed according to protocol. But the destruction logs didn't match the evidence logs. Drugs were disappearing from evidence storage, only to reappear in the trunks and glove compartments of innocent people's cars. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. The officers would stop someone on a deserted stretch of road, plant evidence they'd stolen from evidence storage, and make an easy arrest. The victim, usually someone with no criminal record and no resources to fight back, would take a plea deal to avoid trial. The officer would get credit for a major drug bust. The prosecutor would get another conviction stat. Everyone won except the innocent person whose life was destroyed. But here's where it got truly sinister. Some of the planted evidence was being sourced from a different location entirely. Keith traced financial records and found that one of the officers, Lieutenant Carson Webb, had a brother who was a mid-level drug dealer. They were running a side business. Carson would seize drugs from actual dealers, return a portion to his brother to resell, and use the rest for planting evidence. This wasn't just corruption. This was organized crime with badges. We spent 6 weeks building an unassailable case. Patricia insisted we do this right. One mistake, one procedural error, and the whole thing could collapse. I became obsessed. I took a leave of absence from my job at Hartwell Insurance, telling them I was dealing with a family emergency. Vanessa was patient at first, but as I became increasingly withdrawn, canceling dates, and spending all my time in the library or with Patricia and Keith, the relationship began to strain. "Caleb, you're scaring me," She said one evening when I'd missed dinner for the third time that week. "You won't tell me what's going on. You barely sleep. You look like you're preparing for war." "I am," I said without thinking. Against who? I wanted to tell her everything. But Patricia had been clear. The fewer people who knew, the better. If word leaked that we were building a case, evidence would disappear, witnesses would be intimidated, and the whole operation would collapse. "I can't explain right now," I said, "but I need you to trust me." She studied my face for a long moment. "You know what? I don't think I can. You're keeping secrets, you're obsessed with something you won't share, and you've basically shut me out of your life. Whatever this is, you clearly don't need me for it." She left that night, and I didn't stop her. I told myself it was temporary, that once this was over, I could explain everything and she'd understand. But deep down, I knew I was sacrificing my relationship because the mission had become more important than anything else. It was Howard Finch who helped me understand what I was really doing. "My son is gone," he told me one evening as we reviewed case files. "Nothing we do will bring Nathan back. But there are people sitting in prison right now for crimes they didn't commit. There are families destroyed. There are futures stolen. Every day we delay is another day those innocent people suffer." He was right. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice for dozens of victims who had no voice. Keith compiled a master file of evidence. It included my dash cam footage showing Howland planting drugs, financial records linking Webb to his drug-dealing brother, evidence logs showing systematic discrepancies in drug seizures. We had everything. The case was airtight. But Patricia warned me that airtight didn't mean easy. "The police union will hire the best defense attorneys money can buy," she explained. "The prosecutor's office will try to negotiate to avoid a public trial. The media will dig into your past, looking for anything to discredit you. They'll find out you were a cop who resigned under pressure. They'll paint you as vengeful and unreliable." "Let them try," I said. "The evidence speaks for itself." "Evidence only speaks if people listen," she countered. "And powerful people have a way of making noise that drowns out the truth." She was preparing me for the reality that even with perfect evidence, we might not win. The system protected itself. Prosecutors depended on police testimony for their cases. Judges had relationships with officers they'd worked with for years. Police unions had political power and deep pockets. We needed leverage. We needed to force the system to act. That's when Keith suggested we bring in the FBI. "Federal charges bypass local corruption," he explained. "Civil rights violations, conspiracy to deprive rights under color of law, evidence tampering, all federal crimes. And the FBI loves taking down corrupt cops. It makes them look good." Patricia made contact with an FBI agent she'd worked with before, Special Agent Monica Hale. Monica was cautious at first, but when we laid out the evidence, she brought in her supervisor. Within 48 hours, we had a federal task force opening an investigation. But we made one crucial decision. We kept my dash cam footage secret. "If they know we have video, they'll prepare for it," Patricia explained. "We need to catch them off guard. Let them commit to their story under oath, then destroy them with evidence they didn't know existed." It was risky. My criminal case was still pending. If the federal investigation somehow fell apart, I'd still be facing felony drug charges. But I trusted Patricia's instincts. The FBI moved fast. They executed search warrants simultaneously at the homes of all 4 officers, seizing computers, phones, and financial records. They raided the evidence storage facility. They interviewed dozens of witnesses. Howland, Webb, and the other 2 officers, Ryan McAllister and Todd Sherman, all lawyered up immediately. They claimed they were being targeted by a disgruntled former cop with an axe to grind. They pointed to my resignation 7 years ago as proof of my unreliability. The prosecutor's office initially stood behind them, issuing a statement about the officers' exemplary service records. That's when we leaked the story to the press. The newspaper article hit like a bomb. Federal investigation uncovers alleged evidence planting scheme by local police. The reporter, Denise Crawford from the state's largest newspaper, had been fed key details by Keith, enough to make the story explosive without compromising the federal case. The article included statistics on Howland's unusually high arrest rate, quotes from family members of convicted victims, and a carefully worded mention of video evidence in the possession of federal investigators. We didn't mention my dashcam specifically. Let them wonder. Let them worry. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. Local news picked up the story. National outlets started calling. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the small-town police department where officers might be systematically framing innocent people. The police chief, Warren Grisham, held a press conference. He looked exhausted and defensive, insisting that the department would cooperate fully with the federal investigation, but that his officers were dedicated professionals who deserved the presumption of innocence. "We have zero tolerance for corruption," Grisham said, reading from prepared notes. "If these allegations are proven true, those responsible will face the full consequences of the law." It was standard crisis management, but the cracks were already showing. The police union president stood behind Grisham during the press conference, stone-faced and silent. You could see the calculation in his eyes: protect the union members or distance themselves from a scandal that could taint everyone. The prosecutor, District Attorney Olivia Hartwell, was in an impossible position. She'd personally prosecuted dozens of cases based on arrests made by these four officers. If they were corrupt, it meant her conviction record was built on lies. Her career was on the line. She made the smart political move. She recused herself and requested a special prosecutor be appointed to review all cases involving the four officers. Behind the scenes, Patricia told me, chaos was erupting. Defense attorneys for every person convicted on drug charges in the past 7 years were filing motions for new trials. The state's appeals court was being flooded with emergency petitions. The governor's office was getting pressure to intervene. The system was buckling under the weight of its own corruption. But we still had a problem: my case. The charges against me hadn't been dropped. Officially, I was still facing 15 years for drugs that everyone now suspected had been planted. The special prosecutor assigned to review the cases, a no-nonsense former federal attorney named Glenn Ashford, was methodical and slow. He wouldn't be rushed, even as media pressure mounted. "We need to be patient," Patricia counseled. "Ashford is doing this right. He's building a foundation that can't be challenged on appeal. If he moves too fast, defense attorneys will claim their clients were denied due process." I understood the legal strategy, but patience was hard when I was still technically a felon awaiting trial. Then something unexpected happened. Howard Finch went public. He held his own press conference, standing in front of his son's grave, and told Nathan's story. He described a bright young man with his whole life ahead of him, destroyed by a planted drug charge he couldn't fight. He showed Nathan's honor roll certificates, his acceptance letter to university, and the suicide note he'd left behind. "My son was not a criminal," Howard said, his voice breaking. "He was murdered by the system that was supposed to protect him. And I will not rest until every person responsible is held accountable." The video went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed 5 million times. Suddenly, this wasn't just a story about corrupt cops. It was a story about a father's quest for justice, about a system that failed its most vulnerable, about the hidden cost of corruption. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Protests erupted outside the police station. Civil rights organizations announced they were filing federal lawsuits. Politicians who'd been silent suddenly found their voices, demanding reform and accountability. The FBI accelerated its timeline. Special Agent Hale called Patricia with an update. They were ready to present evidence to a federal grand jury. They wanted to include my dashcam footage. "It's time," Patricia told me. "Are you ready for what comes next?" I thought about Nathan Finch, about the 17 other victims willing to testify, about all the people still sitting in prison for crimes they didn't commit. I thought about Vanessa, who'd left because I'd pushed her away. I thought about the cop I'd tried to be 7 years ago, idealistic and naive. "I've been ready," I said. The federal grand jury indicted all 4 officers on multiple counts: conspiracy to deprive civil rights, evidence tampering, theft from government property, and making false statements. Howland and Webb faced additional charges related to drug trafficking. The indictment was sealed until the officers could be arrested simultaneously. The FBI coordinated with the U.S. Marshals Service to execute the arrests at dawn on a Tuesday morning, ensuring maximum media coverage. I watched it live on the news from Patricia's office. Derek Howland, the man who'd framed me and dozens of others, was let out of his suburban home in handcuffs, his wife screaming from the doorway, his teenage kids watching their father's world collapse. I felt no satisfaction, only a grim sense that justice, while slow, was finally moving in the right direction. The unsealed indictment included something that made my breath catch: a still frame from my dash cam footage showing Howland's hand slipping the plastic bag under my passenger seat. The image was grainy but unmistakable. The timestamp was clearly visible. The press went wild. This was the smoking gun everyone had been waiting for. Video evidence of a police officer planting drugs on an innocent person. Irrefutable. Undeniable. Howland's attorney held a brief press conference, looking shell-shocked. "We intend to fight these charges vigorously," he said without conviction. But everyone knew the fight was over. The evidence was too strong. The pattern was too clear. The video was too damning. Within a week, the special prosecutor moved to dismiss all charges against me. In a brief court hearing, Glenn Ashford stood before the judge and said, "The state has reviewed the evidence and concluded that the charges against Mr. Garrett were based on fabricated evidence. We move to dismiss with prejudice and offer our sincere apology for the injustice he has suffered." The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, nodded grimly. "Charges dismissed. Mr. Garrett, on behalf of this court, I apologize for the failure of justice in your case. I trust the responsible parties will be held fully accountable." I walked out of that courtroom a free man, vindicated but not whole. The fight had cost me my relationship with Vanessa, months of my life, and a sense of security I'd never fully recover. But it had given me something else: purpose. The federal trial of the 4 officers began 8 months after my arrest. It was a media circus, with camera crews packed into the courthouse and protesters on both sides, some supporting the police, others demanding justice for the victims. I testified on the 3rd day. Patricia had prepared me thoroughly, coaching me on how to stay calm under cross-examination, how to avoid getting defensive or emotional. "Just tell the truth," she said. "Let the evidence do the work." The prosecution played my dash cam footage on screens throughout the courtroom. The silence was absolute as everyone watched Howland plant the drugs, his movements captured in perfect clarity. You could see him glance around to make sure no one was watching. You could see the calculation in his body language. You could see the moment he decided to destroy my life. When the video ended, the lead prosecutor, a stern woman named Veronica Aldrich, turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just watched a police officer commit multiple felonies. You've watched him frame an innocent man. And this is just one case. You will hear from 16 other victims who had no camera, no proof, no way to fight back." Howland's defense attorney tried to discredit the footage, suggesting it had been doctored. But the FBI's digital forensics expert testified about the metadata, the cloud upload timestamps, the impossibility of editing the video without leaving traces. The defense had nothing. The cross-examination was brutal. Howland's attorney, an aggressive trial lawyer named Victor Brennan, tried to paint me as a disgruntled former cop with a vendetta. "Isn't it true, Mr. Garrett, that you resigned from the police force after filing a false complaint against my client?" "I resigned after my complaint was ignored. I corrected, and it wasn't false. Officer Howland planted evidence then too. I just couldn't prove it." "Convenient that you suddenly have proof now. I installed a dash cam because I learned not to trust the system to protect me. That turned out to be the right decision." Brennan tried to suggest I'd set up the traffic stop deliberately, that I'd somehow engineered the whole situation to entrap Howland. It was a desperate argument that made no logical sense, and the jury's expressions showed they weren't buying it. Howard Finch testified about his son. He brought Nathan's suicide note, his university acceptance letter, and letters Nathan had written from prison maintaining his innocence. Howard described visiting his son in jail, watching him deteriorate, and finding him dead 2 years after his release. "My son told me Officer Howland had planted drugs in his car," Howard said, tears streaming down his face. "He begged me to believe him. And I did believe him, but I couldn't prove it. I failed my son. The system failed my son." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. 16 more victims testified. Each story was the same. Routine traffic stop on Route 47, body camera mysteriously off, drugs discovered in their vehicle. Most had taken plea deals to avoid trial, accepting criminal records and destroying their futures because fighting seemed impossible. One victim, a single mother named Kelly Brenner, described losing custody of her children after her drug conviction. Another, a college student named Trevor Walsh, described losing his scholarship and dropping out of school. A military veteran named Isaac Stone described being dishonorably discharged after his conviction. The pattern was undeniable. The damage was catastrophic. The defense called character witnesses for the officers, other cops who testified about their dedication and professionalism. But under cross-examination, several admitted they'd heard rumors about Howland's arrest tactics but had never questioned them. Officer loyalty. One witness said uncomfortably, "We're supposed to have each other's backs, even when that means protecting criminals with badges." Veronica Aldridge asked sharply. The witness didn't answer. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned with their verdict, the courtroom was packed with victims, family members, activists, and media. Guilty on all counts. All 4 officers were convicted. Howland and Webb, facing the most serious charges, were sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. McAllister and Sherman received 5 years each. All 4 lost their pensions, their law enforcement certifications, and their freedom. Judge Milton Crawford, who presided over the trial, delivered a scathing statement at sentencing. "You betrayed the oath you swore to uphold. You weaponized your authority to destroy innocent lives. You corrupted the justice system for personal gain. The damage you've caused cannot be fully measured or repaired. This court can only ensure you face consequences proportionate to your crimes and pray that your convictions send a message that such corruption will not be tolerated." The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge allowed it to continue for a moment before restoring order. I sat in the gallery, watching Derek Howland being led away in handcuffs, and felt empty. Not triumphant, not satisfied, just tired and sad that it had come to this. Patricia squeezed my shoulder. "You did it. You took down the whole network." "We did it," I corrected. "And there's still more to do." She was right. The convictions were just the beginning. The convictions triggered an avalanche of legal action. Every person convicted based on arrests by the 4 officers had grounds for appeal. The state's appellate courts, already overwhelmed, had to establish a special review panel to handle the caseload. Glenn Ashford, the special prosecutor, announced his office would work with defense attorneys to review every case. "Justice delayed is justice denied," he said in a press conference. "We are committed to righting these wrongs as quickly as possible while maintaining due process." Within 6 months, 43 convictions were overturned. People who'd served years in prison walked free. Criminal records were expunged. But the damage couldn't be fully undone. Years lost couldn't be returned. Families broken apart couldn't be easily mended. Careers derailed couldn't simply resume. The financial costs were staggering. The county faced dozens of civil rights lawsuits from the wrongfully convicted. Insurance companies projected potential liability in the hundreds of millions. The police department's budget was gutted as money was redirected to settlements. Police Chief Grisham resigned under pressure. The entire department was placed under federal oversight, with FBI monitors ensuring compliance with constitutional policing standards. Body camera policies were overhauled. The evidence room was completely reorganized with new tracking systems and oversight. But the biggest change came from an unexpected source: me. Howard Finch and I had become close during the investigation and trial. We'd spent countless hours together, united by our shared mission. After the convictions, Howard approached me with an idea. "We can't bring Nathan back," he said, "but we can make sure this never happens to anyone else. I want to start a foundation, the Nathan Finch Foundation for Justice Reform. It would help wrongfully convicted people fight back, provide legal assistance, and push for systemic changes." "That's a beautiful idea," I said. "How can I help?" "I want you to run it with me," Howard said. "You understand the system from the inside. You know how to fight it. And you have credibility that I'll never have as just a grieving father." I thought about my job at Hartwell Insurance, my quiet life analyzing network security. It seemed meaningless now compared to what Howard was proposing. "I'm in," I said. We launched the foundation 6 months after the trial ended. My civil rights lawsuit against the police department, the county, and the individual officers had resulted in a settlement of $4 million. I put $2 million into the foundation. Howard contributed his savings and mortgaged his house to add another $300,000. We recruited Patricia Cho as our legal director and Keith Dunn as our chief investigator. The foundation's mission was threefold: provide free legal assistance to people claiming wrongful conviction, investigate patterns of police misconduct, and advocate for policy reforms to prevent evidence planting and other corruption. We announced the foundation at a press conference outside the courthouse where the officers had been convicted. 17 former victims stood with us, including Kelly Brenner, who'd regained custody of her children, and Trevor Walsh, who'd been readmitted to university. The Nathan Finch Foundation exists because the system failed, I said to the assembled media. It failed Nathan. It failed me. It failed every person standing here today. Our goal is to make sure it doesn't fail anyone else. We'll fight for those who can't fight for themselves. We'll expose corruption wherever we find it. And we'll never stop until the justice system actually delivers justice. The story went national. We were featured on major news networks, podcasts, and documentary series. The foundation received donations from across the country. Within a year, we'd helped overturn 12 wrongful convictions in 3 different states. But the real satisfaction came from the small victories. Like when Kelly Brenner sent us a photo of her daughter's birthday party, the first one she'd been able to attend in 4 years. Or when Trevor Walsh graduated with honors and thanked us in his commencement speech. Or when Isaac Stone was reinstated to the military with full honors after his conviction was overturned. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. The police department, now under federal oversight, became a model for reform. New leadership implemented strict accountability measures. Body cameras were mandatory and couldn't be disabled. Evidence handling protocols were completely redesigned with multiple layers of verification. Officers received extensive training on constitutional rights and ethical policing. It wasn't perfect. There was resistance from old guard officers who resented the oversight. The police union fought several reforms in court. But slowly, steadily, the culture was changing. Derek Howland, meanwhile, was not adjusting well to prison life. According to news reports, he'd been assaulted twice by other inmates who didn't take kindly to corrupt cops. He'd been moved to protective custody, where he spent 23 hours a day in a small cell. I didn't take pleasure in his suffering. I just felt a grim sense that justice was being served in ways both official and unofficial. Vanessa reached out to me 6 months after the foundation launched. She'd been following the news coverage and wanted to meet for coffee. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you," she said when we sat down. "I thought you were just obsessed, maybe having some kind of breakdown. I didn't understand what you were fighting. I couldn't tell you," I explained. "The investigation had to stay secret. I know that now. But Caleb, you shut me out completely. You made the mission more important than us." She was right. I had. And I couldn't even argue it was the wrong choice, because the mission had been more important. Dozens of innocent people were suffering. Nathan Finch was dead. How could I have prioritized a relationship over that? "I'm not asking to get back together," Vanessa continued. "I just wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did. And I'm proud of you for seeing it through. We parted as friends, with mutual respect, but no romantic future. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt." The second year of the foundation's operation brought new challenges. We started investigating a case in a neighboring state where a detective had been falsifying witness statements. The local prosecutor fought us hard, claiming we were undermining law enforcement. We received threatening letters. Someone slashed the tires on Howard's car. But we didn't back down. We'd learned from the Howland case. Documentation, evidence, patience, and persistence would win the day. The detective was eventually charged with perjury. 3 convictions were overturned. The pattern was repeating, but this time, we were ready for it. The civil lawsuits against the police department and the county continued for 3 years. Each wrongfully convicted victim had a legitimate claim for damages, lost income, emotional distress, legal fees, and punitive damages for the department's deliberate indifference to constitutional rights. The county's insurance company tried to deny coverage, claiming that intentional criminal acts by officers weren't covered under the policy. That led to additional litigation between the county and its insurer. The legal bills were staggering. County Commissioner Phyllis Alderson, facing re-election, tried to blame the previous administration. This corruption happened under prior leadership, she insisted at a town hall meeting. "We're committed to reform and accountability." But voters weren't buying it. The county had hired these officers. The county had promoted them. The county had ignored warning signs for years. The responsibility couldn't be dodged. In the end, the county settled 47 civil rights cases for a total of $83 million. The settlements were funded by a combination of insurance payouts, bond measures, and budget cuts. The county's credit rating was downgraded. Property taxes increased to cover the debt. The taxpayers paid for the corruption of their police department. That was the bitter reality of systemic failure. The guilty were in prison, but the community bore the financial burden. Some residents blamed the victims for suing. "It's our tax dollars," they complained at county board meetings. "These settlements are bankrupting us." Howard Finch attended one of those meetings and delivered a response that silenced the critics. "My son is dead because this county's police officers framed him. How much is his life worth? How much is justice worth? If these settlements hurt, good. Maybe next time you'll pay attention to who you're hiring to carry guns and authority in your community." The financial reckoning extended beyond the county. The 4 convicted officers had their homes seized to help pay civil judgments. Derek Howland's house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch where he'd raised his 2 kids, was sold at auction. His ex-wife had divorced him within months of his conviction and taken the kids out of state to escape the stigma. Ryan McAllister declared bankruptcy. Todd Sherman's elderly parents had to sell their home to cover his portion of a judgment. Carson Webb's brother, the drug dealer who'd supplied some of the planted evidence, was serving his own federal sentence for drug trafficking. The corruption had destroyed not just the victims' lives, but the officers' families as well. Wives and children suffered for crimes they hadn't committed. That was the collateral damage of choosing greed and power over integrity. The police union, which had initially defended the officers aggressively, eventually settled a lawsuit brought by reform advocates. The settlement required the union to implement new ethics training, establish an independent review board for misconduct allegations, and stop using union dues to defend officers charged with crimes of corruption. It was a landmark agreement that would influence police unions across the country. The local newspaper, which had initially been skeptical of the corruption allegations, published a comprehensive investigative series examining how the scheme had operated for so long without detection. The series won a state journalism award and revealed systemic failures at multiple levels. The district attorney's office had never questioned the unusually high arrest rates. Supervisors had never audited body camera compliance. The evidence room had operated with minimal oversight. Defense attorneys, overworked and underpaid, had rarely challenged the arrests aggressively. Everyone had failed. The corruption had thrived because good people had looked the other way. The state legislature, responding to public pressure, passed the Nathan Finch Accountability Act. The law required mandatory body cameras that couldn't be manually disabled, real-time cloud upload of all footage. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Governor Alan Vance signed the bill at a ceremony where Howard Finch and I were invited guests. "This legislation cannot undo the harm caused," the governor said, "but it can help prevent future tragedies. We honor Nathan Finch's memory by ensuring no other young person suffers the same injustice." Howard wept as he shook the governor's hand. 7 years of fighting, 7 years of grief, had finally produced something tangible. The Nathan Finch Foundation expanded to 6 full-time staff and 20 volunteer attorneys. We handled over 200 cases in our first 3 years. Our success rate was 73%, meaning nearly 3/4 of the cases we investigated resulted in either exoneration or significant sentence reductions. We became nationally recognized as experts in wrongful conviction cases. Law schools invited us to speak. Police departments, the reform-minded ones, anyway, consulted us on best practices. Legislators contacted us when drafting accountability legislation. But the work was emotionally exhausting. Every case meant diving into someone's nightmare. Every wrongful conviction represented years of stolen life. Every family we met was broken in ways that couldn't fully heal. I started seeing a therapist to deal with vicarious trauma. Dr. Raymond Chun, I know, common AI name, but it's what my therapist was actually called, helped me process the weight of carrying so many people's pain. "You can't save everyone," he reminded me during one session. "You can't fix every injustice. You need to accept your limits." But accepting limits felt like giving up. There were still people in prison who didn't belong there. There were still corrupt officers who hadn't been caught. How could I rest when the work was unfinished? Because if you burn out completely, Dr. Chun said gently, you won't help anyone. Sustainable advocacy requires sustainable self-care. He was right, but it was hard advice to follow. Derek Howland's first parole hearing was scheduled for his 6th year in federal prison. The foundation received notification that we could submit a victim impact statement. I hadn't thought about Howland much in the years since his conviction. The foundation's work had consumed my attention, pushing the personal vendetta to the background. But the parole hearing brought everything flooding back. I debated whether to attend. Patricia thought I should. Closure, she said. You need to face him one last time and close that chapter. Howard disagreed. Don't give him the satisfaction of knowing he still affects you. Let him rot and forget about him. In the end, I decided to go. Not for closure, but because the other victims deserved to have someone speak for them. The parole hearing was held in a drab conference room at the federal prison. Howland was led in wearing prison blues, shackled at the wrists and ankles. He'd aged dramatically. His hair was completely gray, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. The parole board consisted of 3 officials who'd reviewed his file. They asked standard questions about his behavior in prison, his remorse, his plans for reentry. Howland gave what sounded like a rehearsed speech. I take full responsibility for my actions. I betrayed the public trust and harmed innocent people. I've spent every day in here reflecting on my choices and the pain I caused. I've completed every available rehabilitation program. I've earned my GED in counseling. If granted parole, I plan to work with at-risk youth, helping them understand the consequences of poor choices. It was a polished performance. Prison had taught him what the parole board wanted to hear. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood and faced Howland directly. He looked at me with what might have been recognition or might have been practiced remorse. My name is Caleb Garrett, I began. 6 years ago, Derek Howland planted drugs in my car and arrested me for a crime I didn't commit. His goal was revenge because 7 years before that, I'd reported him for planting evidence on someone else, a report that was ignored, allowing him to continue destroying lives. If I hadn't installed a dash cam, if I hadn't had video proof, I would be the one sitting in prison right now. I would have lost everything for a crime that existed only in this man's imagination and corruption. But I'm not here just for me. I'm here for Nathan Finch, who took his own life after serving 3 years for a crime Derek Howland invented. I'm here for Kelly Brenner, who lost custody of her children. I'm here for Trevor Walsh, who lost his scholarship. I'm here for 43 other people whose lives were destroyed by systematic corruption. Derek Howland just told you he takes responsibility. But responsibility without restitution is just words. Has he contacted any of his victims to apologize? Has he contributed to their recovery in any way? Has he done anything except serve his mandated time and participate in programs designed to reduce his sentence? I paused, holding Howland's gaze. He looked away first. The parole board will make whatever decision it deems appropriate. I continued. But I want to be clear. Granting early release to a man who weaponized his authority to destroy innocent lives sends a message about how seriously we take police corruption. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't poor judgment. This was calculated, systematic, criminal behavior sustained over years. Nathan Finch doesn't get parole from death. The victims don't get parole from their trauma. Derek Howland should serve every day of his sentence, and even that won't balance the scales of justice. I sat down. The room was silent. The parole board asked Howland if he wanted to respond. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I destroyed lives, and I can't undo that. I was consumed by ego and the need to advance my career. I convinced myself I was doing good work, that the ends justified the means. I was wrong. He turned slightly toward me. Mr. Garrett, you were right to report me the first time. If internal affairs had done their job, none of this would have happened. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope that someday, you and the others can find peace. It sounded sincere. Maybe prison had changed him. Maybe the years had brought genuine remorse. Or maybe he was just a skilled manipulator who'd learned to perform contrition. I didn't know, and I realized I didn't care. Whether Howland was truly sorry or just playing a role didn't change anything. The damage was done. The victims had suffered. Justice had been served according to the law. The parole board deliberated privately and announced their decision the same day, parole denied. Howland would serve the remainder of his sentence. As he was led out of the room, he looked back at me one last time. I saw no anger in his expression, just exhaustion and resignation. He'd become what he deserved to be, powerless, confined, and forgotten. I felt nothing watching him go. No satisfaction, No vindication, no closure. Just a tired recognition that some battles, once won, don't bring the peace you expected. Outside the prison, Patricia was waiting. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Empty," I admitted. I thought facing him would mean something. But he's just a broken old man now. The system beat him. Prison beat him. He's not the threat he was. "That's growth," Patricia said. "You've moved beyond revenge into real advocacy. Howland is just one man. The work you're doing affects thousands." She was right. The foundation had become bigger than any individual case. We'd helped free 93 wrongfully convicted people. We'd influenced legislation in 11 states. We'd trained over 200 defense attorneys on how to challenge questionable police testimony. We'd changed the system, not just punished one corrupt cop. That evening, I called Howard. The parole was denied, I told him. There was a long silence. Then, "Good. Nathan can rest a little easier." "How are you doing, Howard?" Another pause. "Some days are harder than others. But the foundation helps. Knowing we're preventing other families from going through what we did, it gives Nathan's death meaning. That's all a father can ask for." We talked for another hour, not about Howland or the parole hearing, but about the foundation's upcoming cases, about fundraising goals, about the lives we were rebuilding. The conversation reminded me that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about restoring the innocent, preventing future harm, and building systems that serve everyone equally. 10 years after my arrest, I met someone who changed everything. Her name was Claire Patterson, and she was a public defender in the next county over. We met at a criminal justice reform conference where we were both speaking on different panels. She was brilliant, passionate, and completely committed to fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. We started dating, and for the first time since Vanessa, I felt like I'd found someone who understood the mission. Claire didn't ask me to choose between her and the work because she was doing the same work. She got it. 2 years later, we got married in a small ceremony at the foundation's office, surrounded by the people whose lives we'd helped rebuild. Howard Finch walked Claire down the aisle since her father had passed away years earlier. A year after that, we had a daughter. We named her Hope because that's what the work had taught us, that even in the darkest circumstances, hope could survive and eventually triumph. I'm 42 now. The foundation has grown beyond anything Howard and I imagined. We have offices in 4 states, 30 full-time staff, and an annual budget of $12 million. We've helped overturn over 200 wrongful convictions. We've influenced police reform legislation in 19 states. Derek Howland was released from prison last year after serving his full sentence. He lives in a small apartment 3 states away, working at a grocery store, required to register as part of his parole conditions. I don't know if he's truly changed or just learned to survive in a world where he has no power. I don't think about him much anymore. The work continues. There are still wrongful convictions to overturn. There are still corrupt officers to expose. There are still families desperate for justice. But I've learned balance. I coach Hope's soccer team on weekends. Claire and I take vacations where we don't check work email. I've learned that sustaining the fight requires sustaining yourself. Last weekend, I was teaching Hope to ride her bike in the park. She was frustrated, kept falling, ready to give up. I knelt beside her and said, "The only thing that limits you is your imagination and your willingness to keep trying. When you fall down, you get back up. That's how you learn. That's how you grow. And no one, not me, not your mom, not anyone, gets to tell you what you can't do. You figure that out for yourself by trying." She got back on the bike and rode 20 feet before falling again. But she was smiling when she hit the ground. Claire, watching from a bench, called out, "You're teaching her to be stubborn like her father." "Stubborn is just another word for persistent," I shouted back. That evening, after Hope was asleep, I sat on the porch with Claire, watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Howland hadn't stopped you that night?" she asked. "Sometimes. I'd probably still be working at the insurance company, living a quiet life, never knowing any of this was happening. Would you be happier?" I thought about it. I'd be more comfortable. But happiness? I don't think so. Ignorance of injustice doesn't make the injustice less real. It just makes you complicit through inaction. "That's very philosophical for a Tuesday night," she teased. I have my moments. We sat in comfortable silence, and I thought about all the roads that had led here. The wrongful arrest that could have destroyed me. The dash cam that saved me. The choice to fight instead of accept. The foundation that had grown from grief and determination. The lives rebuilt, the system challenged, the small victories that accumulated into something significant. None of it had been easy. All of it had been worth it. My phone buzzed with an email from the foundation. Another potential case, another person claiming they'd been framed, another family seeking justice. I'd read it in the morning. Tonight, I was just a husband and father, sitting on a porch with the woman I loved, grateful for the unexpected path my life had taken. Derek Howland had tried to destroy me. Instead, he'd accidentally created someone who would spend his life making sure no one else suffered the same fate. That wasn't the revenge I'd planned. It was better. Justice had been restored. The arrogant had been punished. And from the ashes of corruption and betrayal, something good had grown. That's the thing about revenge done right. It transforms into something greater than itself. It becomes justice. It becomes purpose. It becomes a life worth living. And in the end, that's the best revenge of all. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Revenge with Zach and share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? Have you ever faced injustice in the legal system? Let us know your story below.